Singapore is bracing for the fallout from the conflict in the Middle East as the government warns of slower growth, sharper price pressures, and possible further steps if the crisis drags on. With 3 ministerial statements delivered in Parliament and support measures now on the table, how might Singapore's economy and sense of security be reshaped in the days ahead? Now, for more analysis, I'm joined by Assistant Professor Reuben Ng from the NUS Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And also with us is Dr. Tamer Beg, who is a Chief Economist at DBS Bank. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Now, Tamer, let's start with you. Singapore has faced global shocks before, so this isn't new. Do you think the economy is better equipped this time, or are we exposed in very new and different ways?
I think there's an element of vulnerability, but at the same time, there is a large element of preparedness. Vulnerability comes from the uniqueness of the choke point of Straits of Hormuz. Even during the pandemic's bad old days, we didn't have a suspension of movement of energy around the world. Whereas now we have this risk. And let's call it a risk because it isn't entirely closed. It's a much smaller capacity that the strait is operating, but at the same time, there is some ships that are going through. Still, it creates a much greater sense of foreboding or vulnerability, but let's be clear in terms of preparedness, reserves, understanding, resiliency. Certainly, Singapore is in a better place than it was during the pandemic or even the 2022 Ukraine crisis.
Now, Reuben, let's turn to you now. Singapore says it's not taking sides, but at the same time, it has a very firm position on principles like international law and also the freedom of navigation. How hard is that balance to strike right now, given the circumstances? And how do you think this 2-week ceasefire is going to impact Singapore?
Yeah, Angela, that's a great question. When I think about balance, I'm thinking about, walking on a tightrope with ballerina precision, right? But I'm afraid that rope has actually snapped. So I prefer to think of a different method, kind of analogy. It's more, a boat on choppy waters, right? Because everything is so uncertain. I think it's important to sort of steady, the ship, roll as hard as possible so that we can move towards the North Star of international law. But it's just really difficult at this time. How would the 2-week ceasefire work? I think the 2-week ceasefire will calm the waters a little bit. So everything is a bit clearer. You can look further beyond the horizon, recalibrate your options, think about which are the different scenarios that will more likely happen, and, patch the boat to make sure that you're ready to ride the next wave.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the government has warned of slower growth and also possible higher inflation here. Tamer, which sectors in Singapore are the most exposed to these risks now, and where could that pain show up first?
I think because there will be substantial price increases in the pipeline, any company that doesn't have significant market power cannot pass on the prices because of either the structure of the market or fears for competition in the market would be the one that would see their bottom line getting affected before everybody else. But we can see, for example, petrol prices from day one of this crisis started to go up, reflecting international price changes. And therefore, you would think that the petrol pump owners, they themselves are protecting their bottom line to some extent. Would there come a time when there is some degree of burden sharing warranted? We're not quite there yet. Right now, those that can pass through prices are basically letting the consumers make the choice. Do you want to pay a higher price for the product, or do you want to cut back on your consumption? But I think it's an important thing to consider that, this is not the first time we're dealing with inflation scare, even in the near term. 2023, 2024, substantial high inflation in the world. During that time, demand situation was strong enough. We took it. Globally, growth did not suffer despite high prices. Are things different now? To me, is the biggest question. Travel, tourism, day-to-day services, would they be affected in terms of quantity demanded? Will we not necessarily worry because we're comfortable about our income outlook, employment outlook, and therefore will continue consuming it? Or will we cut back? That's the question.
Yeah, and Reuben, given that there are no drastic energy measures yet, there is a warning that more action might be needed if this crisis drags on. What signal do you think the government is sending to both households and businesses here?
I think the signal is one of confidence and reassurance. I think it reinforces the psychological contract between the government and the people of Singapore that, we have weathered through different crises before. We have learned from it. We have different options. We have different draw plans, and we are ready to sort of weather the crisis together. So I think it's important in such crisis to sort of give a message of confidence so that people do not panic.
Yeah, and speaking of that message of confidence, one way of reassuring citizens here is one of the biggest announcements made, which is the $1 billion support for firms and businesses to weather this storm. We have associations like the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce Industry saying that such measures will provide near-term help. But it also adds that the firms must continue to push on with both transformation and also to refresh these business models. Tamara, let's come to you. What kinds of business model transformation are we looking at here and that firms should prioritize in order to stay competitive?
In terms of firm priorities, we have a cyclical issue, which is around this oil price. But we also have a structural issue. There are tech disruptions taking place. The way globalization has been affected by the tariff war, that's changing the way we think of business. So tariff, tech, and the war are three different things that businesses now have to consider in terms of their operating model. I think the common thread among all three is agility. To be nimble at a time when shocks are almost a given. There is no BAU anymore. You have to be prepared that a pitfall is just around the corner. Not necessarily sure what the pitfall is, but a pitfall is there. And when that happens, can I bounce back? Can I be resilient? Do I have enough buffers? Have I saved up enough? Is my workforce capable of being flexible? I think those are the general principles that were applicable in the pandemic, price shock of 2020-22, through this tech disruption, last year's tariff war, and this episode.
Yeah, and to cover these bases, Ruben, as you mentioned earlier, there was a message of confidence that you would say coming from the government. But is the messaging enough so far to reassure the public, while also at the same time really preparing all of us for the tougher measures that are coming, especially with all this uncertainty?
I mean, if you think about the public, we need to understand that the public has become much more diverse, in the last 10 years. So one message may not fit all, right? It may fit 50 to 60%. So we really need a different strokes for different folks approach. Now, what do I mean by that? An SME may have taken an Enterprise Singapore grant to expand overseas, but because of uncertainties like this, they may scale back, right? So there may be some check on the aspirations, and they may have been planning to hire a new team, right? So that team now may not be hired. So for the people who may have lost their jobs or may not be hired, it's really an existential survival thing. But for the companies, it's more about checking their aspirations. So I think the messaging needs to really resonate, with different groups of people facing different issues. But I think what is more important is that we cannot just depend and look out, from a government perspective to think about what they can do for us. I think it's time to sort of look left, look right in a way to see how we can help each other out. And I think what's more important is that if we feel that we are in a sinking position, please seek help.
Yeah.
Because without seeking help, without that agency, there's no way we can move forward together.
Yeah, it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, so to speak. Now, Tamara and Ruben, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your perspectives with us. I've been chatting with Assistant Professor Ruben Ng from the NUS Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and Dr. Tamara Baig, who is a Chief Economist at DBS Bank.